prosecutors, I don't know if they're born or if they're made, right? But that commitment to fighting for justice is something that we all have.
Welcome to the podcast Sophie au Pays des Possibles, the first podcast in French about the women and men that tackle corruption and tax evasion. I'm Sophie Lemaitre, and today is a special episode that was recorded in English. For this episode, I'm taking you with me on a journey behind closed doors to meet the Corruption Hunter Network, a network of anti-corruption prosecutors from around the world. I was deeply privileged to join the last gathering of the network in April this year in 2023 to witness the powerful and inspiring stories, the strength and the courage of these prosecutors that investigate and prosecute ground corruption cases. That is, major corruption cases that often involve high-level political officials and multinational companies. In this episode, you will get to hear rare and precious testimonies from 7 anti-corruption prosecutors. For confidentiality and protection reasons, you will not know their names or the countries where they are from. But I can tell you this. You will be hearing from 1 prosecutor from Europe, 3 prosecutors from Africa, and 3 prosecutors from Latin America. This episode also features interviews of Lisa Stansett, Policy Director for Anti-Corruption at NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, which supports the Corruption Hunter Network. The interviews were recorded live during the meeting, so you may hear background noise. And sometimes you will hear a beep, and that is because we're hiding the name or the countries mentioned. Corruption affects every single country around the world, as 1 prosecutor from Africa reminds us.
You know, in the hierarchy of crimes which threaten society and which are important to combat, corruption is way up there. And as things have developed in my career, from the early days, 20 years ago until now, the importance of corruption has grown. It's a greater threat than it ever has been to various jurisdictions. The well-being of countries and their relationships, and also just the well-being of people in the countries. Corruption is a huge threat because, it saps away the finances and applies those finances in a way which is incorrect and which threatens the well-being of the people. So it's important because it's a very, very threatening crime. And I like it and I regard it as important to do because if you're successful, it can make a difference to improving the lot of people that you serve as a prosecutor.
I couldn't agree more. Corruption is a huge threat to democracy, development, and social justice. Corruption is often cross-border, and mechanisms used are sophisticated. For example, multiple layers of companies and intermediaries are used to hide the corruption. Criminals, corrupt actors are organized, and as Eva Joly, former financial investigative judge in France, and former member of the European Parliament once said, "The criminals have their network, so why shouldn't those hunting the criminals have their own network?" This is what led to the creation of the Corruption Hunter Network in 2005. Lisa Stansett from NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, tells us more about the creation of the network.
It was created almost 20 years ago. It was when the negotiations around the UN Convention Against Corruption started. Norway was so lucky having Eva Joly in Norway, not in France. She had this strong feeling that there were nowhere to speak and meet other prosecutors. And of course, at that time, the number of meeting places to discuss corruption were not established. And she felt that since the criminals had organized themselves so well, also the prosecutors could do it. So she took the initiative with great support from the then Norwegian Development Minister and established this network.
NORAD has been supporting the Corruption Hunter Network since the beginning. For NORAD, it is crucial not only to support the network and its members to address corruption and impunity, but also to get on-the-ground information and experience from the prosecutors to then influence negotiation and discussion at the international level.
We get a greater understanding of where this fits in the bigger context. And I think for us, every time we have this meeting, for Nora, we can sort of have one more suitcase with us full of interesting and useful information, which we can use also to work on these more, let's say, global processes and be more relevant in the international negotiations around corruption. So for us, it gives us the perceived sort of challenges, also experienced from country level, that we can sort of try to reformulate up and feed into those processes.
The Corruption Hunter Network is an informal gathering of 20 to 25 people who meet twice a year in different locations around the world. For example, in April, the members met in Slovenia. One of the main characteristics of the network is that the members have first-hand experience in investigating and prosecuting corruption cases. The members are mainly from the prosecutor office or the anti-corruption agency. I asked Lisa how the members are selected and invited to join the network.
When we look for participants to the network, we try to follow what's going on in the world and where it's going on and see whether people who have that experience, who either is embarking on an investigation or has finished investigations and cases, could come and share this knowledge with us. But we also had people who just starting up and who needed to sort of connect with other people.
After speaking to Lisa, I asked different members of the network why and how they joined the network.
Well, I was involved in 2004-05, that's nearly 20 years ago now, with a big corruption case in the High Court and my then superior, who was, let's say, the boss of our corruption investigating and prosecuting agency, introduced me to the network that he had just joined a few months previous to that. So because of my experience and because he wasn't available to go to the meeting, he sent me in his place. Since then, I have attended many, many meetings over the years and had many discussions on the subject of transnational corruption.
I joined the network, I think it was 6 years ago, because I was invited at first, but now it's very important for me because you in some way somehow relate to the problems that are the same all over the world as a prosecutor. So I think that's important that we understand that the problems are common problems.
I was a prosecutor when I first joined the network in, I think, 2019, 2020. And it was, when you are working alone in your country, it can be very overwhelming. And just learning that there are other people in other parts of the world doing exactly what you're doing, having similar struggles, but finding innovative ways to cope. Just knowing that you're not alone, and that there are other people struggling in just the same way that you're struggling, I found hugely encouraging, right? I also found it useful. Like when you're working, there's constant pressure, there's constant stress, to literally come out of the country and reflect. You go back with new insights, with new approaches, with new ways of looking at things, and you just feel you can try new things. So I found the support that you get from being with people who are doing the same thing you're doing is invaluable.
The network also invites key people that have knowledge, experience, and contact that can be of support to the prosecutors. This can be from civil society, UN agencies, and research organizations. So what do the members do during those meetings? Well, these meetings usually last for 2 days. Participants talk about the latest of anti-corruption in their countries. They discuss common problems. Different themes of relevance to their work are also presented. For example, in Slovenia, we learned about anti-corruption trends in the Middle East and ongoing anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine and Moldova.
To have this kind of meeting to be useful, I think what maybe differs this meeting compared to other meetings is that we have very few guests speaking. It's the participants. Every meeting coming forward, they are the ones that are sort of feeding into the agenda. And I think this time we had Ukraine and we have also another guest speaker. And we try to pull that in a few of these every meeting. But the heart of it is the participants themselves. And we also try to engage them by actually having the participants chairing the various sessions, which is a way to connect people and get them to know each other better and also to maybe ask them other type of questions.
These meetings are also an opportunity for participants to share their personal stories.
Coming from the first presentation the two of you made about the value of this network, I mean, I feel deeply privileged to have heard your story and the way that you told it. You know, we've all been in moments of despair. You know, in my moment of despair, I gave up. I just didn't see a way. And just listening to how you find hope and inspiration to continue is something I take out of that. You know, your story about being hugged by those women and really cherishing those, you know, and let those be the moments and the things that stand out and carry you through, I think is incredibly powerful. And I think it's a lesson we can all take, you know, to dwell on what's good about this fight and what's positive and what's encouraging, because it's very easy to dwell on the darkness.
Alone, a word that I heard a lot during the meeting. Being an anti-corruption prosecutor is a lonely job. You do not make friends by disturbing powerful political and economic interests. But the Corruption Hunter Network provides a safe space to the prosecutors. It is unique in many aspects. I asked the members why they value so much the network. First, the members come from the different regions around the world, and that allows for insightful conversations.
The idea of the network has been from the beginning that there should be an equilibrium between people from, let's say European countries and countries outside of Europe. The idea was to have people from both sides, let's say. If we look at corruption from the corrupted individual side and from the corrupting entities. And that's what I found interesting, because I met people there like others who have been in the network even before me. At the time, other people from who are no longer there. I met also people from African countries that I would never have come across otherwise. And I realized that over the years, the circle of people, there were also changes, of course, because if somebody left their office or went over to defense lawyer side or whatever, he or she would no longer be a member of the network. But I realized that this was based on individual recommendations and mutual trust.
The Corruption Hunter Network is also a place where the prosecutors can share their stories, experience, the challenges and problems they face. They learn from each other and they can get advice, for example, asking others how they solved a similar problem.
There are many aspects which all contribute to the value of the network, but the greatest value is being exposed to colleagues worldwide who relate their stories and the cases they've been involved in and the situations that they found themselves in. They relate those to the network, and you then learn how other colleagues in the rest of the world deal with their problems and what the problems are. That brings you to the realization that there are very few problems that are unique to any particular country. Most of the problems are universal in the sort of work that we do. And knowing that and being able to learn from your colleagues gives you the tools necessary to deal with your own situation appropriately. And also, obviously, to share with other colleagues your experiences so that they can use them to learn and to deal appropriately with the problems that they're facing. So it's basically learning, sharing, and also gaining the support and friendship of people across the world, your colleagues, who are in the same or similar situations to you and other colleagues within your own country. It's a tremendous help.
I met people from countries with whom we have cases together. I would, of course, not be able to exchange case-related information or evidence with those people in the network, but they would be able to advise me how to go about it when transmitting a request. Let's say typically in a politically sensitive case, you would normally have to go through the diplomatic channel, You would have to send an MLA request through the embassies, and it would land at the Ministry for External Affairs of the country in question, who could then typically alert their president or politicians if they were the object of such an investigation. So in such a case, I would talk to somebody whom I knew in the network, because that's a really confidential issue. And that person would maybe advise me to deposit the MLA request at the embassy in that country, and then the prosecutors would go to the embassy and pick up the request to find other channels to transmit the request, always respecting the rules, but trying to minimize risks. So in terms of technical advice, I would, over the years, repeatedly depend on colleagues in the network who could advise me about how things are done in their country.
I think that contacts are very important. We can call someone in the network for help in mutual legal assistance or in experience of what they have to problems that are common. We all have problems or with mutual legal assistance in some countries, how they solve it, because sometimes there are countries that are very difficult to find this assistance. So you can contact a person or a hunter that's been there and that represents like an agency that can help you. It's been very important for me, the contacts.
I would only underline what my colleague was saying regarding the sharing experiences. That's something that is very important because the net is composed by different backgrounds, prosecutors, investigators, people that are related to anti-corruption from different levels, organizations, civil society, and people that is invited to participate in one of the meetings, share experiences that are useful for your work, for your life, in every sense, not only emotionally, the support that is very important, but also to see that there are alternatives that are available, that are used in different countries and that can be shared and can be of use. For me, it's something very important, and that's the added value that you were asking for.
Most importantly, the Corruption Hunter Network is a space for moral support, to keep up the fight. Members can express freely with no judgment. The network makes a huge difference to its members. They are not alone.
There's one network member, he always said this was the only meeting that he felt welcome to, because most meeting he went to would be meetings to discuss problems, But here at least he can meet people who have the same experience and feel that, if you encounter some of these challenges, you may be able to actually sort of find ways on how to deal with it by actually discussing it, and also to raise it in a forum where it's not stigmatizing, it's not showing a sign of weakness, rather the strength. Yeah, you try to find ways of how to get further and maybe live and encounter these challenges.
It's moral support, first of all, because, you have seen it yourself. You come into a room where you know the people and you can freely express yourself and be heard and understood. And it almost sounds like group therapy. It isn't, of course, but it's just an atmosphere of trust where you can speak freely. The network, as I said, is unique in its appearance. It's different from all the other platforms. I feel extremely privileged to have been a member of the network for such a long time. I've met tremendously interesting people in the network. I've formed friendships with those people that have helped me professionally also, For the network to be there is better than if it wasn't. That sounds like a really small statement, but it's a huge statement, It does make a difference. You need to be really very inside of all these matters to understand. It's an insider thing. There's not many people that know about it, and there's not many people that understand what it does. But those few people that are there that understand it, for them, it can make a tremendous difference.
The work that as a prosecutor I have to do is sometimes frustrating. You deal with many things and you think sometimes that you're alone. This is happening and just only me. It's important cases, political pressure. How can all the people around the investigation wants to affect the investigation and you personally, because you're the prosecutor. And sometimes, as I say, personally, I think that this helps because you now realize that you're not alone, that someone is coping with the same problems that you do and they're like positive, or they say, yes, you're going to encounter this and this problems, but you have to go on. I remember many times after a presentation just going to and said, I know what you're going through. I have also the same problems, and you have to be like positive, or you gave me the motives to endorse all the problems that I have. So I think that contacts, yes, but also personally, you get all this good energy that you take home.
I found support from the network in working through what to do with some of the challenges that I was experiencing at a personal level. And the fact that when I left my position, I'm still part of the network, it's helped me process and helped me reflect on what I could have done differently, where I could have improved things. I still work in anti-corruption work, and so I'm able to try and share some of my experience with colleagues around the world.
Well, look, it was established in 2005, so now we're coming up to nearly 20 years, not quite. But many prosecutors the world over, I think, are very grateful for the support that the network has provided, just being able to be in touch with one's colleagues worldwide and to have a safe home and an administration which looks after us, but keeping us in touch and keeping the topics valuable. I think one can't express sufficiently one's appreciation for what's been done over the years.
Prosecutors face multiple obstacles when investigating a corruption case. Corruption often involves multiple countries, and to build a case, one needs to collect evidence abroad. But some jurisdictions, such as Hong Kong or Dubai, are known for not collaborating. Prosecutors have other challenges. For example, who is a victim of corruption? How do we ensure that the funds are not embezzled again when those that stole the money are still in power?
The obstacle, especially when you have a case where you needed to collect evidence from outside your jurisdiction. That can be a challenge, especially if that evidence you need it in the jurisdiction where that jurisdiction is not really fully cooperating with your request. That's a big challenge because at the end of the day, you will not be able to prosecute. Unfortunately, you find some of the authorities, because maybe of their system or just unwillingness to assist, to render what we call international cooperation, when you send a request to them, they are not responding. Unfortunately, that is one of the challenges that can really frustrate you. Because these days, every country wants to do something about money laundering, financing of terrorism, and all sorts of organized crimes. But that can only be done when evidence is readily available and assistance is forthcoming. Asset recovery of what has been stolen needed to be recovered so that whatever proceeds can benefit the people who suffer as a consequence of the stolen of those assets. Those are the type of successes that we want to make out of our efforts.
If we are looking at transnational corruption cases, let's take a hypothetical case where a company is accused of having bribed officials somewhere across the ocean, wherever it is. We would need to have evidence regarding the corruption that has taken place. If that country is not willing to cooperate with us, if that country does not execute MLA requests that we send or does not enter into contact and cooperate with us, we are blind on one eye, at least. These difficulties depend very much on whether in the country on the other side of the corruption equation, there has been a political change and a new political will to address these issues, to deal with the past, or if the situation still continues on the same level. Those are definitely challenges, and those challenges go all the way. Let's say that we even manage to come to terms and to wrap up such an investigation and to have assets maybe frozen and we could give them back to the country. If it's still the same corrupt politicians that are in power, we will hesitate to hand them back their own assets. So the challenges are on numerous levels, and not to forget also that corruption is not easily grasped in terms of who are the bad guys and who are the victims, especially. Who is really a victim of corruption? Who can actually speak out? And also there we are a little bit hampered in our legislation because we don't have the possibility to admit, like in France, representatives of victim groups as private claimants and to actually enter into the case. We don't have that. We are also limited in that regard, but that's a question of also political will on our side. That's just the way it is. So it's really difficult for somebody to come forward in a corruption case and say, I am the victim and I can demonstrate that I am a victim.
Whether you are in Europe or in Africa or in Latin America, there are similar challenges when you investigate a corruption case. First, you have to deal with limited human and financial resources. Investigating a corruption case often means that you have to take on the powerful, and there is an imbalance of power between the prosecutors and those accused of corruption.
I think for me, the biggest frustration is our job is to take on the powerful, right? Powerful corporations, powerful government officials, politicians, but the resources at our disposal is minimal. And in comparison with what those who have stolen have at their disposal, we are always on the back foot. I think a prosecutor earlier said that when you train, you learn that the mighty state has all these resources, right? Whenever you get to court, you just have to look where the resources are sitting. It's not in the state's benches, right? It's in the benches of the defense counsel, who outnumber by an order of magnitude that is just ridiculous what the prosecution is able to put up. I find that is very depressing because, we'll never have all the resources we need to tackle each and every case, but I think we need more of a chance that we have at the moment. And I think this is actually what I'm discovering. This is not an African problem, right? It's not even just a developing world problem. I think the developed world is equally struggling with the mismatch between what the state has in terms of resources to tackle the powerful corporations, the powerful governments who, when they decide corruption happened but no one's going to do anything about it, we are not up to that job. So I know it's depressing and it's partly why I left, but because I think that it's just an imbalance that I'm not sure going to get us anywhere.
This might sound surprising, but it's a wealthy country. We do have resources, but we do have limited resources. And these cases, we have to deal sometimes with extraordinary amounts of data, let's say digital data, that we have to analyze. We need enough resources in terms of manpower and also logistical support, computers, data processing devices, whatever you have, in order to access and analyze this data. And sometimes we have to wait years until we even can start analyzing this data because our procedural code has a special measure which is called putting the seals on evidence. So if we go into a house search, the searched person or entity can ask or can request seals to be applied. They can argue that business secrets or other secrets would be violated if my office got access to these records. We then have to request the lifting of those seals. That request has to be presented at specialized courts for coercive measures. Each has such a court, and that can take sometimes years until these requests are decided upon. So sometimes we literally lose years, until we can even start to deal with these amounts of data. That's not even specific to corruption cases, but of course we are facing the most powerful law firms in the country and outside of the country in these cases. They have resources much less limited than ours. In that regard, we are not better off than colleagues in other countries. It's an inequality of manpower and resources.
When you're dealing with transnational corruption and commercial crime, and even big national corruption and commercial crime, the sort of people that you're dealing with tend to be different to your ordinary common or garden criminal. They tend to be leaders. They tend to be powerful in either politics or in the country or in business. They tend to be innovative. They don't like being challenged. So the minute you challenge them and they see that there's a challenge which is they're going to have to fight, then they tend to react in ways which are characteristically vindictive and challenging. They typically throw up all sorts of obstacles in your way and end up in various ways attacking you, attacking the prosecution as a whole, attacking the prosecutors involved, attacking the investigators, the forensic people, both less threateningly in court and by way of challenges to what you're trying to do, legal challenges, but also it tends to get personal. We've learned from corruption hunters all over the world that threats to your integrity particularly, and challenges to that, and also sometimes even your physical security, are things which come up again and again worldwide.
Investigating and prosecuting corruption cases can be dangerous. In May 2022, a prosecutor from Paraguay was murdered while on his honeymoon in Colombia. He investigated high-profile corruption and money laundering cases in Paraguay. Beyond the risk of being murdered, anti-corruption prosecutors face a wide range of attacks, from budget cuts, threats of losing their jobs, to attacks on social media and media outlets, internal investigations, and formal complaints. Prosecutors are being sued and have to face trials for doing their jobs. No country is spared. The objective is to stop them from doing their jobs. It has a chilling effect, discouraging others from opening corruption cases, with prosecutors wondering who's next.
I think that around the world, problems are the same. For example, we have attack of politicians around the world. I received a lot of claims against me. I think that colleagues from also receiving claims, especially in civil area. So the problems are the same in the whole world. And I think that it is important to discuss and to know, to find a way to avoid this problem. It's difficult for us personally. I have a problem, for example, because I needed to contract a lawyer to defend me. It's difficult for me. 2 or 3 times I needed to contract a lawyer to defend me before a civil court.
In my case, well, I have more than I want accusations against me because they think that that's the way they could get me out of the way. In my legal system, it's not enough to just present an accusation against me because it's not the way it is, but they try. Before a hearing, they say, no, she can't be here. I don't want her because I have accusations against her. Oh, how convenient. You don't want the prosecutor that knows all the case, all the details of the case to be in this hearing. Well, it's not the way that things are. But in that case, yes. And sometimes they have friends in media. One morning, I wake up and I'm in the papers because he said that he has accusations. And this prosecutor has this, and this accusation. And it's like public pressure against you. And you have to deal with it because you can't, as a prosecutor, go in the media just to answer all of that because it's part of the case. So you are in disadvantage sometimes, and they know that. But I think that at least at this moment, I can say that there is a very strong judicial system in my country. So I trust that all these things can be managed.
I had a very small experience that I want to share, but for me it was very important that I was invited by one university to speak about what I was doing at the office. And the most well-known investigative journalist of was invited with me. And after the event, told me that I should lower my profile because I was under observation. And after that, I was very emotionally affected. And the first thing I do, I contact Lise and I told her what happened because I have family, it's my work, it's my life. And if we cannot speak freely, imagine if your work, the effects of your work. I think it's something that through the years I learned that if you are being claimed, it's because you're doing your work. If nothing happens, it's because you are not doing anything that bothers the ones that are corrupt or that prefer statu quo.
The attack in social media is difficult for me also because sometimes the politician has a lot of followers in social media. The prosecutor suffers some attack of the people, of the person that uses social media. It's difficult for us because we have a private life. My family read in social media these attacks against me. So it's difficult for me, this problem. But we need to go ahead. We need to work against corruption. I know that it's difficult and we need to fight always against corruption because someone needs to fight. We are the person that can try combat the corruption around the world.
Even though I have not gone through any form of threat personally, the issue of fighting corruption is like when one of your counterparts is undergoing through that kind of threat, then the question is, who next? That's the main question. As a result, whenever we have a colleague who is going through that, we need to give a necessary support possible to him so that he or she does not feel that she's alone. Just as my colleague said, when I was going through the difficulties, myself, I am currently I had to write a letter to all the member countries' counterparts, heads of anti-corruption agencies, mobilizing them to send messages to demonstrate to that she does not stand alone in what she is going through. And she received a lot of communication. All of them, they've sent a message of solidarity to her because we feel that a threat to her is a threat to all of us because next it could be us. And we cannot fight corruption effectively in a manner where one of us is being threatened. Because fighting corruption does not take only an individual country. It's a matter of countries cooperating and giving each other, as we said, necessary cooperation so that we all succeed.
One colleague of mine called me when they saw that news on the paper, and I said, I'm happy that he's talking bad about me because I would be worried if he was talking good about me. I mean,
That's true. So it means you're doing your job.
Yes.
Over the last 10 years, we have seen an increase of attacks against prosecutors. There have been investigations and trials conducted against anti-corruption prosecutors in France, Italy, Romania, Nigeria, South Africa, and Guatemala, among many other countries. With all these threats and attacks, I've been wondering, how do they stay positive? And how do they keep up fighting against corruption? And why?
It's not all the time that I'm positive. I have to tell you that. Sometimes I feel frustrated and I keep asking that question very often. Why am I doing this? I think that maybe you feel the responsibility. I have 26 years of doing this. Sometimes I say, I know that I can't be doing this for a long time because it's very frustrating. It takes all my energy. I have family and all that. Also, my husband keep telling me, why are you keep doing this? And I said, I feel a very important responsibility. I know that I can help. After all this work that you do, the only way to deal with it is to think positive. The only way, at the end, you have to think that something good has happened. If at the end you didn't have the conviction you wanted, for example, there has to be something good from all the case, the investigation. That's the way we deal with it in the office. Because if not, after all these years, it wouldn't be possible to be here. Something good I can take from this. You appeal, you go to court again. Sometimes you feel negative. Sometimes it's not as good as you will. But there are some good times also. And from the not very good times, you have to think, what do you learn from that? Yeah. Because now, what we will learn, I don't know, but just learn.
Sometimes I don't agree with the word impossible. I needed to fight to the wind to know if it's impossible or possible. So I think that we need to find the interior force to fight against corruption. It's difficult, I know. Sometimes I am depressed, but we need to go ahead to fight. And I had a lot of problems. All prosecutors has problems. And I think that if not possible, stop the fight. Always we need to fight. And so for me, I am stubborn.
So you keep fighting.
Yeah, yes.
Well, I suppose, one can say that you have to continue because that's your job, unless you're going to resign and leave the prosecution service. These are the cases which you're assigned and you have to do them. So it's a simple case of, well, do I give up my career and do something else, or do I carry on doing what I'm tasked to do? And the answer often is, well, that's what I do, and I'll do that. So you carry on. To carry on positively and doing a proper job and doing it with enthusiasm is a challenge often, especially if it takes a long, long time. But that's what we do. Gaining support from your colleagues in your own country, your bosses in your own country who support you is enormously valuable. And also, as I said before, just learning about what others face in the rest of the world and realizing that we're not alone, that there's nothing unusual about what happens in these cases, that does give one strength. The successes that you get now and then, after many years of prosecuting and investigating, the successes that you get are often well worthwhile, because if it's a big case and if it's important to the country and to the prosecution, it gives one a feeling of having achieved something, which is worthwhile to you, your colleagues, your organization, anti-corruption agencies, investigating agencies, and the country as a whole.
It's a national interest. You have the national interest at heart. You cannot just leave the national responsibility just because of social media and individual. Out of the population, definitely there are those, even if they are not outspoken, there are those who are behind you. They appreciate the efforts that you are making. When you have got a national interest at heart, you cannot just quickly leave the responsibility. That's why even she's still on the job, beside what she went through. She was arrested, she was embarrassed, the worst way you expect from a person of her level. But still, she decided, I'll carry on up to the end of my term. That is a principled position. It's very important, because if you give in, your enemy, that is what they want. They want you to compromise, and you make them heroes, because they shall have succeeded in what they have done. And whoever is going to succeed, they will do the same again to him if she starts carrying on with the courage the predecessor was doing the work. They will do the same, because they know that the previous one gave in, so let's carry on with this one so that we can also bring him or her down. So we have to show our commitment to what we have been assigned to do.
I think what does keep me going on in the fight is looking at the courage of the people in the room, right? Everyone's been through a lot. People have sacrificed a lot, and it's incredibly inspiring, right? I mean, presentation really touched me in significant ways. I agree that prosecutors, I don't know if they're born or if they're made, right? But that commitment to fighting for justice is something that we all have, and I found that the space for me to be effective in my former job closed, right? And so I've left, but you can see that I'm completely engaged still in the fight, whether it's at home or abroad. So I think it's very inspiring to share experiences with people who have been through so much, right, and still keep the fight alive. And I think that's what's great about this network, is that you don't hear these stories, right? The prosecutor story, you're not going to hear those where we are on the southern tip of Africa there. But to sit in a room and know that almost every person in this room has that kind of story to tell is encouraging and inspiring.
It's my duty, I think I represent my country, and I would like to contribute to my country being perceived as a serious and reliable partner in these cases, and also for us to, at least, the least we can do, be a thorn in the side of the corporate defendants especially, and of the individuals working for the corporate defendants, just to keep them on their toes and, not make them feel that they are above the law. Can we stand up against them and at least make them take us seriously and think twice in the future?
Prosecutors cannot speak publicly and defend themselves when they are under attack. They have a duty of confidentiality and must show some reserve. Meanwhile, the defendants will organize a sort of media trial accusing prosecutors in the press, with the risk of influencing the public perception as well as the judge. Just to give a recent example from my country, France. Nicolas Sarkozy, former president, was convicted in May 2023 by the Court of Appeal in Paris for corruption and undue influence. As soon as the judgment was known, he gave interviews accusing one of the judges to be partial, because in 2009, the judge criticized the content of a justice reform supported by Nicolas Sarkozy. Following these accusations in the press, the Paris Court of Appeal issued an official statement to support the judge. NGOs, media, the public have all a crucial role to play to fight corruption side by side with prosecutors. During the meeting, a member of the network told us about the power of the people. When that member was arrested, people went in the street and demonstrated their support to the prosecutor and the importance of combating corruption. This pressure by the people, by the citizens, led to the prosecutor's release from prison. So the support provided by NGOs, media, the public is essential, as you will hear from these prosecutors from Africa and Latin America.
I think that civil society as a whole can be very supportive of our work. My country is a very small country, and sometimes civil society or NGOs are related to political parties, so you don't know if the support is really authentic. But I think that there's the support and there's also the responsibility of civil society also. But we need that, the support that we, as one prosecutor was saying, that just to address us and say thank you, for example, or I don't know, the women that supported this prosecutor, she was telling it, sometimes it's not just what we get paid, the satisfaction. The satisfaction is when they say, okay, it's good, your job is making something. Because when you're a prosecutor, you don't get many friends. Okay? You just said, what do you do for a living? I'm a prosecutor. Oh. It's not very popular. You're not very popular in your country.
Especially if you say you work on anti-corruption, on money laundering.
Yes, but sometimes it's nice to get that your work is meaning something to someone.
In our country, we've been fortunate in the battle against corruption generally that the public has generally been quite supportive of our agencies prosecuting and investigating. The press has also been supportive generally of the fight, and prosecutors generally have had a fairly good name. So if one gets that support from the public and the press, which is deserved, I mean, obviously you don't want support for people that are not doing a good job. But if you're not targeted and pilloried in the press and by the public unnecessarily, then that goes a long way to keeping us going. And where it goes wrong, where politics or public opinion turns against the investigating agencies and prosecuting agencies, leading often to their closure, which has happened in our country, busy being reversed. But, that is a calamity to lose political support, which is based obviously on popular support to an extent. It's very disheartening and dangerous and can lead to the collapse of the agencies and the collapse of some prosecutions. So what the public can do is just keep a sober mind, don't get diverted by false reports of misbehavior.
In a way, it is a lonely job. It's not a popularity contest. At times you're going to be reviled. One of the biggest challenges I faced, and I think also spoke to this, is the online attacks, which is a new kind of threat. Before we used to worry about physical threats, but the kind of character assassination that is possible on social media out of nothing, right, is a massive challenge. And so even if we were to be able to communicate, that kind of challenge is difficult. And so it would help, if there was greater awareness that those kinds of attacks are coming from a particular place. But you have to build support in the country for the work that you're doing. You can't just not communicate. I think we do have to find ways to communicate, and we do need NGOs and investigative journalists to tell our side of the story, without prejudging cases. But it really is a tough terrain because you can't just speak in defense. You have to go to court and let the evidence speak.
I agree with what my colleague has said. I must tell you that really it breaks down your inspiration and the courage when you have the public making such bad social remarks against you at the time when you are trying to make efforts to fight corruption. We need the support of NGO and we need the support of the media. It should not be an individual support, no, because we actually have a professional responsibility and we are guided by ethics in the work we are doing. It should be a support directed to the fight against corruption. When you find an environment whereby the authority is attacking the person fighting corruption, and the media, again, through social networking, is also attacking the very same person, this person will be finished. And he or she will no longer have courage to carry on with a good mission of fighting corruption, because she will realize that in this work I'm doing, I don't have a team that is really backing up. The media can play a very bigger role. I have demonstrated when I was presenting how the media contributed to expose what was happening in this. It was very critical, very, very important. Had it not been there, and if the public was not also there pushing for these people to account, maybe we could not have succeeded to the level that we have succeeded to expose what was happening.
I think that the corrupt politician is afraid of the people. It's the only power that the politician respects. 2013, for example, we had a problem with Congress because they intended to remove the power of the public prosecutor's office. And the people went on the street to fight against the Congress. It was very good. We have interview with newspaper about this movement of the people. So the participation of civil society is very important for us because we fight beside the people. The people see that public prosecutors or commission anti-corruption around the world as a unique possibility to fight against corruption, in my opinion. In 2013, the Congress stopped the project to remove the power of public prosecutor's office because the politician has afraid of the people, in my opinion.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Share it with your network, friends, family, colleagues to help spread the word about the fight done by anti-corruption prosecutors and judges around the world. I would like to thank NORAD, in particular Liz Stansard and Harald Mattison, for inviting me to join and be part of this amazing network. Thank you to my former colleague at U4 Anti-Corruption Resource Center, Sophie Schutte, who introduced me to the network in 2019. And a huge thank you and expression of gratitude to the hunters for sharing your stories, making me feel at home, and for your friendship and kindness. You inspired me and gave me strength to keep up the work. This episode is my tribute to your courage. To all of you listening, if you understand or speak French, check out the episodes of Sophie au Pays des Possibles. You will hear amazing stories from NGOs, activists, whistleblowers, researchers from around the world.